Hello and welcome to this session. We are going to talk about sustainable investments. I'm Silvia Pavoni. I'm a journalist with the Financial Times Group and I focus on sustainable finance and broader sustainability issues. And I'm here talking to Luke Ellis, who is the CEO of Global Investor Man Group. Welcome, Luke.
Thank you, Sylvia. It's nice to see you.
So the task, as I said, is to address the role that finance, and more specifically in your case, investments can play in addressing broader sustainability issues. And the first question I guess I want to ask is whether it is fair to put this role on investment firms such as yourselves and asset managers and more broadly investors when sustainability itself is often poorly defined. So can we reasonably expect investment firms to actually make a difference?
Look, I think in order to get global economies to work in a truly sustainable way, in order to maintain the planet with hopefully 1.5 degrees or less of global warming from the industrial age, everybody is going to have to contribute. But it is definitely right that asset management, finance generally and asset management in particular, has to take up a significant portion of the burden. You know, the reality is we are the owners of companies, we are the owners of assets, and so we have a responsibility with that to do things in order to really make sure that we are not just encouraging companies, but driving companies to do the right thing, making sure that assets, the right sort of assets are financed. You know, one of the things of the energy revolution that has begun but has to go incredibly quickly if we're going to get to a net zero world is there is a huge amount of investment needs to be financed into wind, solar, hydrogen, power, et cetera, et cetera. And, the asset management industry is the conduit for investment dollars in the world in the end.
So let's get into the details of what that entails and how you go about actually engaging with the companies that you invest in. You are an active investor, which means that you actually do take a more active role in these assets that you channel capital towards to. And let's start with the environmental side, because perhaps that side is a little bit better defined than the others. And of course, when we talk about sustainability, we tend to use the perhaps a little bit clumsily put together abbreviation of ESG as a synonym of that. So environmental, social, and governance factors. Now, we both know that governance is something that finance and investors tend to tackle on a sort of day-to-day.
Always.
And now we're focusing a little bit more on environmental and social. So let's start with environmental. What does that mean? And again, we are seeing green taxonomies emerging and regulation that is trying, particularly in Europe, that is trying to help in that sense. Is it helping? Is that kind of mandatory approach helping, or would you rather see a more industry-led approach, or maybe both? And what is your specific approach when you look at companies?
Sure. I think that, when it comes to environmental, I think it's a very broad subject, even if you just pick the E. And, often we find that clients find it easier to engage with the subject when you focus in on climate and temperature change, because that is something that it's sort of people can see happening all around them and recognize that, if we get more flooding than we have now, suddenly things get very unpleasant very quickly. If we have hotter temperatures and so on, these things start to change people's lives, are changing people's lives. And so climate is the easiest part of environmental for people to engage with. But environmental is a super important subject. I think it's important when you are engaging with clients whose money it is you're trying to get invested into things helping move the environment in the right direction, that you can engage them with a story. If it's just, you should have ESG, people go, yeah, but I don't really know what it means. And that's where, you get to this combination of self-imposed standards from the asset manager, the requests from clients if they understand the different things that they're looking for, and regulation that will help to hopefully push up the minimum threshold and to produce some standardization. And I think one of the things of regulation is that regulation never drives the behavior of well-managed businesses, because you're not trying to do things which are being regulated away. In this case, the arrival of sort of standards about what counts as an ESG fund or doesn't count. So far in Europe, we have some standards. They're newly released, but they give you standards. The UK is rushing to get their own standards out. The US is moving to get their standards out. It would be lovely if we had a single standard, but we're not going to get there for some time, I suspect. But what regulatory things do is to impose minimums. And as I say, for well-managed businesses, I think, people will already be doing more than the regulatory requirement. But for the people who are trying to ignore it, the regulatory standards are a very good way of pushing up. So it pushes the average up by bringing the bottom end up. It doesn't create leadership, but it does. I think the other thing that comes with regulatory standards, so standards are a good thing, but they do need to be monitored and regulated, and somebody needs to enforce them. That's part of the point about these things. If they come from regulators, they are supposed to enforce correct behavior, and that is something we're yet to see, though I'm sure will come over the next few years.
So there should be a concerted effort, as you were saying, from all players, and even better if this comes across the globe. But of course, we are still very much at its early days in this process. But
maybe COP26 will come up with some standards across the globe. But sadly, one of the things of financial regulators around the globe is they tend to like their own local standards, and so I suspect we won't have a single regulatory framework for, what really is an ESG fund, what isn't an ESG fund, what is a fund that is active around ESG, and what is a fund that is driven around impact, because those are different standards.
So are you concerned that greenwashing or the fear of greenwashing is going to derail all these good efforts? You were talking about what is an ESG fund, what is not. And unless we all agree on common definitions or minimum definitions, I guess there is still that concern. And we also need to accept that some will ride that rising and trendy green wave. So how big an issue do you think greenwashing still is?
I'm afraid I definitely think it's a significant issue. And as you bring in regulatory standards, the temptation of people is to wash more, not less, until there's some enforcement around those standards. I think there are a lot of people trying to do the right thing and trying to move quickly towards better standards and better behavior. But, given clients are leading the way for much of the asset management world, in Europe, the reality is if it's not an ESG integrated strategy, there are large parts of the European sort of investor community who just won't look at it. And therefore, there's a very big incentive for people to say that they are integrating ESG factors. If they do the work, then that's fantastic. If they cut a corner, that's greenwashing. And so it's for investors to police whether people are doing the right thing, and it will end up with regulators policing whether people are doing the right thing. It's embedding ESG into asset management is entirely doable, but it takes a lot of work. The information, the data around ESG is messy. People say the same words and mean different things. There are no standard reporting standards for companies. There are no, what is in reports, what's not. One of the interesting things now, there are sort of 2, 3, 4 people doing ratings on ESG. One of the things of the credit rating agencies that we know from previous times is relying on them was not the right thing to do, even if they provided some interesting information. But one of the things you definitely saw in credit rating agencies is they all gave basically the same rating, still do. So, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, Fitch, the rating they give on a company is, or a government or whatever, is very similar. When you look at ESG ratings, they are all over the place. And we find that there's less than a 50% correlation between the ESG ratings from different rating agencies, the sort of people who are looking at reducing ratings. That tells you that these are not commonly understood ideas, commonly understood. And so in order to make sure that you are doing the right thing with your portfolio, it takes a bunch of work. It takes a bunch of active engagement in either with the companies or with the data. It's sort of not all provided to you on a plate. Now, that is what active asset management is supposed to be about. And so, active asset managers like us charge a fee, and the fee is for doing work, and ESG requires a lot of work. So that's fair enough, but people have to do the work.
So let me ask you about what is a good investment in this sense. So what is good in terms of perhaps your short-term or even longer-term return, or what is good in terms of a longer-term sustainable impact or positive impact on the environment or on society. For example, is it good to hold oil, or should everyone just sell it?
So I think at the moment, ESG standards and understanding is very much focused on corporate securities effectively. And so, people have a general view about whether it's good to hold an oil company or not hold an oil company. And, most people in the ESG world consider that, clearly burning fossil fuels is bad for the environment, bad for the planet. And so not owning oil companies is good for your ESG score. I think the question, though, is it better to not invest in an oil company, or is it better to invest in an oil company and engage with the management to drive their behavior to better things? Today, BP is one of the largest producers of non-fossil fuel energy, of green energy. They are investing significantly into, now if everybody stops investing with them, they'll have no incentive to do that. In a similar way, you want to be careful that when you engage with a company, what they don't do is sell the assets that you don't like, sell an oil field somewhere to a private but worse actor and, say, look, I've improved my ESG score because I've got rid of the bad thing. Even if they get rid of the bad thing by shutting it down, that's good for the planet. If they get rid of the bad thing by selling it to somebody who is a worse actor than the person who had it originally, that hasn't improved the overall outcome for the planet. And so, asset managers have to actually think about both the first order effects of their engagement and the second and third order effects of, what we're all trying to do. We're committed to net zero by 2050 and a significant improvement in the trajectory by 2030. Most of the largest asset managers are now part of that type of initiative. And you have to not just worry about the things you're investing in, but you are trying to make sure that the overall planet gets to net zero, because that's the only way that we all actually survive in the end.
And we have seen some investors actually forcing change, particularly in the oil sector. You are an active investor. Are you also an activist investor?
So we have been involved in some relatively high-profile engagements with companies. We are more active than an activist. So our approach is to invest in shares in companies and talk to management and try to convince them of what we think they can do to improve the company, and to say, if you're not going to improve it, we will sell the shares and go and buy something else. Many of the activists go with a sort of, hey, I'm going to embarrass you in public if you don't do what I suggest. And my experience is most CEOs don't really react well to that type of pressure, and it doesn't create the change that you want. Sort of positive engagement where we talk to management about how they can do things which will help the company, help the planet, and help the shareholders is something that most CEOs are interested to respond to. They understand how much of the investing dollar is going in an ESG direction, and so they want to understand what is it they have to do to make their business more attractive, their shares more attractive to ESG investors. And so we're in the coaching management rather than shouting at management.
Right. Okay. So a more diplomatic role. But how much of your portfolio, and correct me if the figure is not entirely up to date, I think you have around $110 billion under management.
More now, thank goodness.
Right. Okay. So how much of that would you consider to be sustainable, to fit in that kind of ESG?
So one of the things is a lot of what we do is to trade securities or assets which honestly people don't know how to think about ESG on. So we trade a lot of macro assets. We trade dollar yen. Is being long dollar yen good or bad for ESG? Don't know. I don't even know how to think about that problem, to be honest. And so we have to look at which of the things we do are sort of realistic for an ESG type of thing. So we have just shy of 50 billion of ESG integrated asset, but it's probably 85 to 90% of the assets that could integrate ESG have integrated ESG. And where they haven't, it's because, there are still some clients in the world who are not believers. And, our job is to serve our clients. And so we have some clients who say, no, I don't want you to include ESG into my portfolio at all. And so, we have to respect the client's wishes. But, that 85, 90% of the available things gives you a sense of, this is more and more all encompassing.
So are you doing a little bit of coaching with the clients as well as you do with the companies?
Yes, but we should recognize, the science is absolutely overwhelming. It's not 100%. The understanding in clients is overwhelming, but it's not 100%. And some people might take longer to understand. That there are parts of the world where what drives their finances is carbon revenues, is oil revenues, and so on. And those areas tend to be slower adapters.
Sure. So another way in which finance and investments is called upon to try and set us all on a more sustainable path is actually changing the way that these firms are operated, are run, and the kind of people that actually work for them. And I know that you have interesting examples, I guess, in the way that you look at recruitment, for example.
Yes, I think that look, we can't change everything in the world as asset managers and as company CEOs. And, we're not politicians, and I know some CEOs almost act like politicians at times, but we absolutely can do a lot to improve our own house and our own industry. And, when I joined the finance industry 35 years ago, it was without doubt sexist and racist and pretty much any other ist you wanted to put on it. It was, was not a healthy industry from being sort of open and engaging to anybody wanting to work in the industry. Over 35 years, things have improved a lot. I think asset management is one of the best areas of the industry, but still there's a lot of work to do. Today, the asset management industry is a sort of 70-30 industry. So 70% men, 30% women. And, one could pick any of the other diverse criteria, and you would find, compared to 20, 30 years ago, where it might have been 95-5 or 98-2, that's a good step in the right direction. But, we know on gender the goal has to be 50-50, and, in any of the other criteria, it should be equally balanced to the percentage of the population. And so I think people often ask, what's your solution? And you go, well, there isn't a silver bullet. There isn't one thing you can suddenly change it overnight. They say, why are there not more women running asset management businesses? Well, I've been 35 years in the industry. Most of the people who would be running businesses today have been doing it 30 to 40 years. And as I said, 35 years ago, it was a pretty miserable place for a woman to join. And, somebody of a black person or whatever, and so when people did, they were mostly weeded out by bad behavior. That's not acceptable, but it was done 20 years ago type of thing. And, what we have to do is concentrate today on how do we get more people of true diversity into the industry.
So how do you do it?
It takes a lot of single small steps, but I think it comes to, so you have to look at different pools to recruit from. So one of the things is, so we recruit a lot of sort of hard scientists, physics, maths, those sorts of things, because a lot of what we do is quantitative and we really need the mathematics skills. The trouble is when you go to universities today and you look at their entries into physics and maths, they are unbelievably heavily weighted to men. And so, you can sit and go, well, it's not my fault. Or you can think, okay, we have to be more creative here. So we sponsor some schools, so like high school age people in maths, in order to get diverse candidates coming through there. But that takes a long time. The other thing is, and I was taught this by the daughter of a friend of mine, who I was talking to what she did at university, and she did biology, and I was, oh, well, sort of when I was at university, that wasn't a, that was a slightly fluffy science. Psychology is another one, was a very fluffy science 30 years ago. What sort of things were you studying? And she basically talked through a statistics and maths degree, which happened to be applied to biology problems, and another person, when I talked to them, applied to psychology problems. And it's like, okay, well, that sounds like you're exactly the sort of person we should, have you ever thought about a career in finance? So, oh no, well, then nobody from finance ever comes and talks to the biology department, the psychology department. And I was like, okay, well, we should do that. And I said, by the way, what are the sort of, what are the gender characteristics of your course at university? She said, oh, well, biology is sort of 60-70% women. You're like, whoa, hang on. So you realize that you're getting the mathematical skills that you need, but in a slightly different group. Similarly, that, it's great to recruit the best of the best from Harvard, from Oxford, from wherever, and to recruit diverse-looking candidates from those places. But they are not truly diverse candidates, because by the time they've made it through a system to come, to graduate from a Harvard or an Oxford, that they think very like the other people on their courses. And so actually, well, physical characteristics look diverse, you're not really getting diverse thinking, which is the point about diversity in an organization. And so we realized we had to go to some different universities. We started to partner with a great university in North Carolina, which is the biggest producer of black engineers in America. It's not an Ivy League school, but they produce exactly the intellectual capability sort of people we want, and they are interestingly different. They think differently. And one of the bits that people get confused, almost everything in asset management and finance is about teams. So we're in the alpha generating business. We're about generating value added in fund management. that is all about creativity. And when you think about creativity and innovation, in every industry that works in small teams. It's not a one-person job. It's not an army job. It takes small 5, 10-person teams. People get confused between, I must have the 5 most perfect candidates for my team. If they all have the same background, put together, the 5 of them are not worth much more than one. If you take 5 people with diverse backgrounds, put together, the team will be better than the 5 who all graduated from Harvard. It's not a go at Harvard or Oxford. We love these places, we work with them, but if you have 5 people with the same academic background, they will think alike and they will not see a problem fully 3-dimensional, multi-dimensionally. If you get people who learn differently, brought up differently, think differently, look different, then you suddenly get something where you get much better collective ideas and the business does better.
Look, thank you so much for sharing your views. Our time has gone really quickly, and I guess as a final comment, I would imagine that being able to recruit and put together a team that thinks differently and from different expertise and skill sets may also help in understanding, quantifying, and then addressing those ESG and sustainability issues. And perhaps you have already seen that.
Yes, I think that's exactly true. And one of the great things of, sort of younger people recognizing the challenges that the planet faces and the need for ESG to, and that actually investing is a route to changing things for the good. Actually, it's been a very good recruiting area for getting interestingly diverse candidates.
Fantastic. And that's a lovely note as well on which to end our conversation. Thank you again so much for sharing your thoughts. I hope that everyone enjoyed listening to your comments as much as I have. And again, thank you so much.
Real pleasure. Thank you, Sylvia.